All right, as promised, we are joined by Sean McAdam, Red Sox beat writer and columnist for BostonSportsJournal.com. He's also author of his own book, Boston, America's Best Sports Town. Certainly can't disagree with that. Sean, how are you, man? Thanks for jumping on with us.
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's get right into it. Let's start here. Obviously, unless you live under a rock, we're all New England people, so COVID's been in the news. Cam Newton obviously was arguably the biggest name to come out recently, testing positive. Sean, I figured I'd ask you. I know you're a baseball beat writer. I wanted to get your take. How would you say, kind of Major League Baseball as a whole? How would you say they did, on a grade or whatever of handling the pandemic this season?
Yeah,
This shortened season.
I know that initially Major League Baseball came under some criticism for not adapting or adopting the bubble strategy that both the NBA and NHL did. But I think sort of an apples and oranges situation. Both those leagues had finished about 80% of their regular season. In the case of the NHL, they essentially went right to the postseason. NBA made up the last dozen or so games. And you knew that there were going to be teams dropping off fairly shortly after they resumed play in the bubble. Baseball's got 30 teams, 26, 28 guys to a roster rather than, 12 to 15 in the NBA, 20 in the NHL. So it was really a different animal. It was precarious for a while there, certainly in August when the Marlins and then the Cardinals had their outbreaks. But I think looking back, I'd probably give Major League Baseball about a B plus. I mean, it wasn't perfect. There were some teams like the Marlins and the Cardinals who had to, play an extraordinary amount of games in a pretty short period of time. Remarkably, both those teams made it to the postseason, and admittedly, it's an expanded playoff format, so that was a little easier to do. But it did not torpedo the seasons of the two teams that were most obviously impacted. And as a whole, I think I read today, they didn't play two scheduled games out of the whatever it was, 30 times 60 is 1,800 games. There were two games involving, I think, the Tigers and Cardinals that didn't get made up because they wouldn't have impacted the race. So, not perfect, but in a challenging year, I'd give them a B plus.
I think that's fair. I mean, like you said, I mean, I was going to ask you, I don't recall any major storylines outside of the Marlins and the Cardinals. And like you said, ironically, they both made the playoffs. Marlins are still in the playoffs. What do you think about the new playoff format? Do you like that? Kind of like a more traditional 1 through 8 seed type of bracket?
I think it probably goes a little too far, and I think Manfred, commissioner in the last week, said as much. I think the goal probably for 2021, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because baseball's collective bargaining agreement ends after next season. It expires with the conclusion of next year's World Series. So a lot of this is going to be on the bargaining table here between the Players and Players Association. What they do next year may not be what they do for 2022 and beyond. But I think the goal is definitely to expand past the current 10 teams in the playoffs, 5 in each league, to 7 in each league. And rather than as we did this year, top 2 finishers in all 3 divisions, plus 2 wild cards on top of that, for a total of 8 per league. They're going to do 7 per league in 2021, or that's the goal anyway, where the team with the best record gets a first round bye. It's almost kind of aping the NFL format a little bit, so that there's an incentive to apply to the regular season so that teams are playing hard until the end. There's a real benefit, obviously, to getting a bye in that first round and not having one of those either best of 3 or best of 5 right out of the gate. And look, I wouldn't consider myself a real traditionalist. I don't want to see baseball make it too easy to get to the postseason, because then I think look, it's a long regular season, 162 games. Have some meaning attached to that. But we also know that money talks here, and when there is an additional inventory of postseason games to sell to TV, which was the reason that they expanded to 16 this year, They knew they weren't going to have, or probably understood they weren't going to have postseason gate revenues. That's where the players are paid in the postseason in Major League Baseball. You don't continue to draw your salary in the postseason, but you get a share of postseason gate receipts. Well, there weren't going to be any gate receipts. So the way they did to make up for it is to sell additional playoff inventory to TV networks and make up for it that way. Going forward, of course, they hope to have fans back and still be able to sell those off. So I think we're probably going to we're going to come down from 16 teams qualifying this year, probably to 14, and I would expect there'll be some agreement that that's going to be the format for the length of the next CBA, whether that's 4 or 5 years, that's to be determined.
That's cool. I mean, I agree. I think you're right with baseball. It's a kind of, I don't know if it's ironic or whatever, but it's the longest season, definitely feels like the longest season. And it's the smallest chance to make the playoffs out of all the majors. It's basically win your division or coin flip at a 1-game wild card type of situation. I do like, it is kind of cool to see some teams now that are maybe traditionally weren't be in the playoffs. Ironically enough, there are a lot of surprisingly good teams this year that typically aren't, like, you know, the White Sox and like you mentioned, the Marlins, the Reds,
first time
stuff like
in
that.
17 years in the postseason.
No kidding. When the Marlins make the playoffs, they win the World Series.
Yeah.
So they
have never lost a postseason series, which is
exactly,
you know, there's a little undercurrent to that. But it is that they are the original kind of all or nothing franchise. They either are finishing in last place and not getting a sniff of the postseason, or when they get in, they run the table. I don't think that's going to happen. I wouldn't see them, even if they could get by Atlanta, which wouldn't be a huge upset. I can't see them beating. I think most people expect Dodgers to move on. Padres, as good as the Padres are, I don't think the Marlins can knock off the Dodgers, but it's a fun story, and it's a testament to Don Mattingly and, you know, that organization's ability to deal with. I mean, everybody dealt with something this year. They certainly dealt with more. You could argue that some of that was their own doing, suggestion that maybe some players weren't as careful as they should be, but in the end, they overcame whatever obstacles were thrown in front of them.
Yeah. Question. Let's get a little bit towards the Red Sox for our local listeners. Would you argue, is there an argument to be made, this is, speaking of where things fall on a spectrum, is this one of the worst Red Sox teams you've seen? One of the worst?
Yeah, I mean,
most unwatchable teams of all time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know about unwatchable, because even in September, there were a few things that held your attention. Yeah. One was the arrival of Tanner Houck. The other was the arrival of Bobby Dahlbeck. That was at least something novel and a way for Red Sox fans to attach some hope to the future. You know, it felt like a lost season in many ways. It was a lost season. But if you're a Red Sox fan and it's the middle of September and they're playing the Marlins or some other team in the middle of the week and you're trying to think of a reason to have a rooting interest, it was, well, let's take a look at this kid Houck on the mound, or let's watch this big slugger Dahlbeck and see if he can hit another home run. Or so I don't know about unwatchable. I think there's always some stuff to, you know, keep your interest if you're looking for it. But look, it's their you have to go back to 1932 to find a team with a worse winning percentage. Actually, losing percentage might be more accurate here, based on, you know, the record they had this year. And I have covered this team since 1989, so this is my 32nd year on the beat, and I don't think there's much question that this was the worst team I ever saw. In that 32 years, I'm a native New Englander. I've watched the Red Sox, and I can remember my first season really following was the Impossible Dream season of '67, and I think I could pretty easily make the argument that this was probably the worst team since then, and that covers 53 years. So
not great.
That's a pretty wide, unfortunately for my age, that's a pretty wide historical perspective that I bring, and I would argue that they're the worst team in a half century or more in Boston.
Jesus, tell them how you really feel, Sean. My goodness.
Tough scene, and
not great.
Sean, one of the guys, Marcus Mookie Betts. I'm sure you've heard of him. You may be familiar.
Sounds familiar. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know your stance on this, like before the season and before the transaction, but having seen how he played for the Dodgers, do you think that was the right move, or what do you think?
Well, I got asked this a lot, obviously, when the trade got made back in February.
Yeah.
And my stance then, I think, is the one I hold to now. And that is that it wasn't so much the decision to trade him, it was what got them there. And I think there's twin tracks that you can look at that led to that moment and that decision. One was, they spent pretty irresponsibly in other ways, whether that be the 4-year extension or the 4-year deal given to Nathan Eovaldi as a free agent, giving him $68 million over 4 years. Even at the time, even coming off of Eovaldi's impressive postseason in 2018, a lot of people around the game thought, is this really the guy that you want to give 4 years and that kind of money to, given his track record, given his lack of durability, given his lack of consistent performance? Then you have the decision to extend Chris Sale before they had to, when he was coming off a shoulder issue. That too, I think, can be second guessed. And really, all those things led them to have this payroll that exceeded $240 million in back-to-back seasons. Now, when you win 108 games and you steamroll every good opponent you play in the postseason, and you have a duck boat parade, it's at least easier to explain why it was that you spent so much money. Well, yes, we spent $240 million, but look, we had the best regular season the franchise has ever had in better than 100 years. We had a World Series where we beat 3 teams that had won 100 games. So it was money well spent. When you win 84 games and you finish in 3rd place and you finish out of the postseason, it becomes tougher to explain that kind of outlay. And it becomes more expensive because of the luxury tax system in baseball. Every time you go over, it costs a little bit more. So you had these twin tracks of the bill coming due, literally and figuratively, having already paid overages the previous 2 years at the exact time that your best player is getting closer and closer to free agency. Yeah. And my stance is that, Mookie wasn't lost this last February when they traded him. He was lost when they were not more aggressive in trying to get him locked up in the years leading up to that. Now, they did approach him. They did make some pretty significant proposals to him, but it was never enough for him to say, yeah, that's worth giving up the appeal of being a free agent and letting 29 other teams in on the bidding process. I think if they had taken that real aggressive approach, they might have locked Mookie up, and then then you're trading Nathan Eovaldi out of desperation, or you're taking half his money back and making that deal to get back under the luxury tax. So people like to, I think people make the mistake of looking at February as that's when the deal got made with the Dodgers and saying, well, why did they do this? When actually the root of the problem goes back several years, and not anticipating that this might be an issue at some point.
Yeah. February was
a conversation for a long time. Why isn't a deal getting done? And then a deal got done. It just wasn't the one people expected or wanted.
Right.
There's a trade out west.
And it should be said, it's early, and no one would suggest that Alex Verdugo, even up, is a good return for a Mookie Betts. One guy is one of the 2 or 3 best players in the game. The other guy has proven to be an all-star caliber player who can do a lot of things and could be a centerpiece around which the Red Sox can build over the next few years. And you've got Jeter Downs and Connor Wong as 2 pretty interesting prospects. I think they did, under the circumstances, they got pretty good return. But again, it was getting there and painting themselves into that corner. That's the real problem.
I think a lot of the narrative on the internet, a great place to go for narratives.
Perspective is always good on the internet. That's what
great place.
It's great whenever you're looking for like a wise opinion. That's right.
A reasoned, non-hysterical reaction. The internet is
Twitter and WebMD are my 2 favorites.
Yes.
Do you consider, I mean, I do see some legitimacy in this question, which is, do you find that the Red Sox offer to Mookie when they were initially trying to work things out with him was almost, I don't want to say insulting, but I think he may have taken it that way?
I won't go
In terms
that
of
far.
how far apart they were.
Yeah, well, it's hard to know exactly. I mean, and that's the other thing that makes this difficult to analyze. Uh, even with the benefit of hindsight, what did the pandemic do to impact Mookie's decision to sign with the Dodgers literally before he had a regular season at bat for him? Because again, the narrative, there's that word, was that Mookie wanted to see what the market was out there, maximize his value. And then all of a sudden he gets traded, and before he can play a regular season game, he signs on the dotted line and signs away that free agent opportunity. Now, how much of that was motivated by Mookie and Mookie's agent saying, this era of guys making $30 and $35 million at the top of the market may not last now, because teams are losing hundreds of millions of dollars this year. There's no guarantee what it's going to look like next year. This could really be a recession across the game, and maybe, the proverbial bird in the hand is worth two in the bush here, and they have put this in front of us. Maybe it's not a bad idea to sign now. Now, maybe that was a factor, maybe it wasn't. I mean, I think at some point the Red Sox had offered as much as $300 million. There's some disagreement over what the term was, how long it was, but I think it was more than a token amount. I don't think it was a CYA kind of offer, like, well, let's put this out there, let's leak it to somebody, and that will convince the fan base that we gave it a good effort. He decided not to stay here. But they clearly didn't achieve what they wanted to. In theory, well, let's assume that they were that they were truthful when they said they wanted Mookie to remain with the Red Sox for the remainder of his career. To me, if he says no, then you come back and say, okay, what would it take? And if he is then saying, well, 450 million, then I think the Red Sox are within their right to at least step back and say, okay, great player, love to have him, cornerstone guy, but do we want to devote, 1/6 of our payroll for the next 6, 8, 10 years to one player? Because history suggests that that's not always a good investment. Now, there are exceptions to that. Ironically, one of those mega deal exceptions that was very much worth the contract that he signed was Manny Ramirez. I mean, for all the joking we make and the difficulties that he created for people over the last couple of years, he produced. And, you look back on that $160 million outlay, almost 20 years ago, that was a pretty good investment and turned out pretty well. But most mega deals like that, certainly for pitchers, but also for position players, often blows up in a team's face. So
tough to follow up the Bryce Harper. Tough footsteps to follow.
Yeah, well, and there's a good example of a guy who is if not a five-tool player, then certainly a well-rounded player who can do a lot of different things, who signs with the team, and they are 0 for 2 in reaching the postseason with him, including an expanded playoff format in which more than half the teams made it, and really still didn't get there. Maybe that's not Bryce Harper's fault. In fact, it certainly isn't solely his fault, but it is a reminder that you can sometimes run down a dead end if you are allocating too big a percentage of your payroll to one player, and by necessity leaving some other needs unfinished.
Yeah. So remind me, what did Mookie end up signing for? I forget roughly.
I'm trying to think.
He fell below like the Mike Trout and the Garrett Cole numbers and stuff, right?
Yes, it wasn't quite as. A lot of it is how you measure it. Do you count the 1 year? I think he was scheduled to make $28 million this year in a pre-arbitration setting. So if you count that, that drags it down a little bit because the rest of the AAV was over 30. So a lot of it is accounting, but in terms of both total value and AAV, I think it fell just shy of Trout. And, frankly, most people would say, well, that's about right. Because as good as Mookie is, Trout has been better for longer.
Yep. Especially with the uncertain future, like you said. Like, I'm with you. I do think the pandemic was a huge part of it because
I
someone
think
offered
a lot
me
of uncertainty that you're looking at and saying, do I really want to say no to something that's going to pay me $34 whatever $1 million?
I'd sign
it. We were just talking about Bryce Harper. I left out the more obvious example, and that's Trout himself.
Yeah,
a guy who has unquestionably been the best player in the game for the last 8 years, and his team has made the postseason once and went out in 3 straight in the first round.
Yeah.
So,
not great.
Again, that question, is it good business? And I don't mean from a profit standpoint, but is it smart baseball in terms of payroll allocation to allot that much to one player?
Yeah. No, for sure. So I'm curious, you mentioned Manny, which is a great segue into something we want to talk to you about. You've been covering the Sox for a while now. What is your favorite, I don't know if it's something like you just saw, or even if you have any personal interactions or stories, what's your favorite Manny being Manny type of moment that you recall or that you've been into personally?
I could name the ones on the field, but I think most people remember, disappearing into the monster to take a leak mid-game.
Classic. Yeah.
Cutting off Johnny Damon's 50-foot throw in medium center field.
Hey, Johnny Damon kind of
rolling over the ball and pardon me?
Johnny Damon could have used the help on that throw. He didn't have.
Yeah, well, that's true. Johnny Damon didn't have much of an arm. He didn't need that much help. Those were all the obvious comical ones. Manny behind the scenes was not much, it wasn't shtick. Yeah. It wasn't this fake persona. He was really this kind of Mr. Magoo-like guy who, went through life, with the girders at the construction site falling right in front of him and barely missing him, and him being blissfully unaware of things that were going on. He was, for the most part, he was pretty happy-go-lucky. I think the one thing that would surprise people, if you go back and think of those Red Sox teams in the early 2000s, and you were to think about Nomar Garciaparra and Manny Ramirez and their approach to hitting, I think most people would expect that it was Nomar who would be, he obviously was very routine oriented to the point of probably being OCD, with the steps and all his machinations in the batter's box and the glove and everything else.
45 minutes.
Knowing what we know about their personas, you would expect that Nomar was the one exhaustively watching video before a game and breaking down at bats, and Manny was the guy grabbing a bat saying, "Who are we facing? What's this guy's name again?" And in reality, it was 180 degrees apart. Nomar was the guy who didn't look at a lot of video. I'm not saying that he didn't prepare. He worked hard, obviously, but he kind of had that rip it and rip it approach at the plate. And Manny was the guy who would often come in at noon and look at video and really study things and really kind of get into the mechanics of his swing. And I think that would surprise most people. People would have ascribed that sort of behavior to Nomar, the attention to detail, all of that stuff, while Manny's happy-go-lucky. But when it came to getting ready for a particular game and a matchup against the pitcher, Manny was the studious one, and Nomar was the guy who just kind of went up there and took his hacks.
Yeah, no, I think that's fairly, I don't know if it's common, but you hear that story a lot. Like we've talked before, like a lot of things came out. I don't know if you followed the Bulls documentary, The Last Dance. They said the same thing about Dennis Rodman. Like on the outside, he's this freakish character, and then they show him at practice before everybody else watching film with Phil Jackson. Like you hear those stories a lot. Like Randy,
it doesn't fit with whatever people's perception is.
Yeah, but to your point, talking about Manny's contract, I mean, whatever his preparation was, whatever kind of dumb shit he would pull on and off the field, the guy could play. The guy could hit.
Hard to argue with the results at the end of the day.
100%. Yeah. So let me ask you this, going back to current day, because you brought up Mike Trout and his, I don't know, his time in the majors at this point. Who's the face of baseball right now? Like who are the most marketable guys right now that baseball really is either leaning on or needs to lean on going forward?
Well, I think Mookie's profile has really taken off in the last year, which is odd. It's not like he's been in Kansas City all this time.
Good point. Yeah.
He's playing in a marquee franchise in a big market city on a team that is on, ESPN Sunday night, Fox Saturday afternoon, make it to the postseason, 17, 18, 16, 17, and 18, all-star, the whole thing. And yet something about playing for the Dodgers, I think, has elevated. And obviously, that was a great team to begin with. They had won 7 division titles when he joined. They'd been to the World Series twice in the last 4 years, haven't won one in a while. But still, the Dodgers are a pretty celebrated franchise with a lot of star players. You've got, he's got 2 other MVPs on that team that are with him now. And yet, I see Mookie's profile being raised this year. And it's almost as if, for whatever reason, he's a little more comfortable in that spotlight in LA than he was in Boston. Now, maybe that's part of the equation. So, I think you definitely have Mookie there. I think by virtue of the fact that the Yankees always draw a lot of attention, Aaron Judge might be kind of in that role. The problem is he can't stay on the field. That he's been had a bunch of nagging injuries over the last few years, and but when he's healthy, he's a dynamic player who, because of his size and power, attracts a lot of attention. I would certainly, it's only been a little more than maybe a year and a half, but certainly Fernando Tatis Jr. is coming up on the rail as a guy who's 21 years old, plays kind of a marquee position in the middle of the field, very talented athletically, and also, definitely part of that new breed of baseball player who doesn't care about the unwritten rules, who's going to flip his bat, who's going to wag his tongue coming off the field after he makes a diving catch like he did the other night against St. Louis. So, I see the Padres as sort of an interesting case study for baseball 2020, because they are so much of that, we don't care about this shit that you guys have been finger wagging about us forever. We're young, we're having a great time. We're gonna preen on the field, and if you don't like it, tough. And that's probably a good thing for baseball, because the sport has correctly come under a lot of criticism for being too stodgy, too tied to its past, and not able or willing to market some of its young players like Tatis Jr. So, those are 3 guys that I'm sure if I sat back and kind of went team to team, I might be able to come up with a few others. But, Francisco Lindor, particularly with free agency coming, is going to be a very interesting case. Where does he go? Trevor Bauer is a guy that,
he's fun.
Welcomes the spotlight, very active on social media. He's going to be a free agent. So, but I would say in a lot of ways, probably the first 3 I mentioned, Mookie, Judge, and Tatis.
If only normal people like us could talk to our boss the way Trevor Bauer talks to his on Twitter, it'd be a fun place to live.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating free agent.
It is
season with him, because not only is he likely to win the Cy Young Award in the National League, but this is going to be his 4th team. He started out with Arizona, got traded.
Oh, that's right.
Got traded to Cleveland, then got traded to Cincinnati, and now it's pretty obvious that he's not going to stay in Cincinnati. And also his approach to go year by year. What's that going to do to the market? Is there a team that might otherwise not be able to? Well, we can't give them Garrett Cole $300 million, but
right.
You know what? We can give them $30 million for 1 year, and we're close. We're the Minnesota Twins. We need to get over that hump that we haven't been able to get over. Okay, we're not tying ourselves long term. We can do $30 million for a year. Or is there a team like the Mets that says we got to make ourselves relevant with the new owner? So let's get a star guy.
That'd be interesting.
Think about what Trevor Bauer would be like playing in New York.
Yeah.
He'd be on the back page of the tabloids, every third day, year round.
Yeah.
The stuff he says in his social media profile. So
it'd be a crazy rotation.
A fascinating case.
Yeah. Well, you already answered the question I was going to ask you before I even got to, and that was, who's the coolest player in Major League Baseball right now, and why is it Fernando Tatis Jr.? So I guess we don't have to go too much into that. But the thing is, like you said, the Padres it'd be a different story if they still sucked and they were a basement team. They're winning games.
You can't do that. You have to have some standing, some level of achievement.
Right.
If you're gonna parade around and be cocky and invite that kind of antagonism or get people riled up one way or the other.
Yeah.
You can't do that in fourth place and be 70 and 92. Seriously. You got to have the stage of the postseason, and they kind of lucked into it. Well, one thing that I think is going to be fascinating in this next week is there's an interesting element to all four of these division series matchups. Got Yankees and Rays, two teams that, as they like to say, don't like each other. You've got the Mike Fiers Houston Oakland angle. You've got the Braves and Marlins has less juice than the other four. There's no antagonism or history there.
Rival, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing. By accident, all four of the division series are teams playing within the same division. Just total luck of the draw. That's how it works. And then you've got kind of the star-studded, more established. The Dodgers are about as established a franchise as you can be on the West Coast. They don't go back 100 years there, but they've been there for 63 years, and they have a great history, in part because of their history on the East Coast. But they're the gold standard on the West Coast, and here come the new kids on the block, the Padres. And they're not about to take a back seat and be intimidated by the Dodgers' reputation or standing. So, baseball got lucky in that way, and that there's 3 great matchups and 4 good ones.
Yeah, I think for the fans, Sean, for the New England fans, anyways, I think a lot of us are probably happy for Don Orsillo that he gets to call that he gets to work for a good team. And I think, what do you think of Ron Acuna Jr.? I think he's a pretty entertaining guy himself on the Braves.
He is. In fact, I picked him. I did not do well in my preseason award predictions. I had Acuna Jr. being the NL MVP. I thought he was really going to have kind of a breakout season. And he had a good season, not a great year, probably certainly overtaken by both Ozuna and Freeman on his own team. And then I had Matt Chapman in the American League, and he, of course, had his season shut down by injury and didn't have the kind of year that he's had in the past. But, Acuna Jr. will be – the Braves can mash just the top 4 guys in that lineup when you think about Acuna Jr., Freeman, Ozuna, and some other guys. That's a great offensive team. So, there's something good that can kind of draw you into all 4 of those division series.
Sure. It's a fair answer. One thing that I like to ask, just as someone, so you've covered the team since '89 and you're a native New Englander, you said, right?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay. Is it sort of a fraternity where it's different this year where this question doesn't apply at all, but 2019 and pre 2019, do you guys hang out after the games, like you as writers and stuff? Or is that tough just because even a home game ends at 10:30?
Yeah. Listen, home games ending at 10 o'clock. Where do I sign up for that? Because not many of them do. The Red Sox are, anytime they're done at 10:30 is a victory in our books, and then made worse by the fact that they made the brilliant marketing decision to start games even later this year. But I think those kind of friendships develop more on the road, because you get out of a game at Comerica Park in Detroit, and you got to get a cab back to your hotel. And in general, we all kind of are on the same timetable. We all have basically the same amount of work to do post game, and generally we end up finishing up and packing up and getting ready to leave the press box in the ballpark at the same time. So it's, oh, where are you staying? Yeah, me too. Let's grab a cab. Or, what's your flight tomorrow? I got the 8:00 American. Yeah, me too. Let's go out. So you take cabs to the airport, to the ballpark, to the hotel. You might grab lunch here or there. So I think that's where, the friendships develop more on the road than they do at home. At home, some of us have families. I do, are married, and you might want to, it's late, you get home, but you're on the road, and it's not like anybody's waiting for you in a hotel room. So you go out and have a couple of beers in the hotel bar, and it's like anything else. If you were to have 10 people doing the same job in an office, two or a group of 2 or 3 would become close. Another group of 2 or 3 would become close. So there are different kind of, I don't want to use the word cliques, because that sounds like it's, back in, like I'm talking about Mean Girls or something. But you might have the same common interests other than, and that's the thing, we kind of eat, sleep, and breathe this job, because it can be 24/7, and it's draining, and you're on the road in a normal time from spring training in February until the postseason in October. You're away from home a lot. You spend more time with some of these people in cabs and planes and hotel lobbies than you do your own family. So, friendships develop, but a lot of it is determined by, other than baseball, which you spend so much time writing and thinking about and talking about. What else do you like? Are you a movie fan? Are you a music fan? And so you find somebody on the beat who might, share some of those interests. I'm like the old guy on the beat now, I've been doing it longer than anybody. When my friend Nick Cafardo passed a couple of years ago, he was a couple of years older than me. He was there when I started on the beat. Nick and I were good friends. Now there are people on this beat who are younger than my kids. So while I respect them, I enjoy reading them. We don't have a lot of life in common. They're at a very different stage than I am. So, I tend to hang out with guys that are closer to my age. But for instance, Chris Castillo, who works for MassLive.com, and is less than half my age. He and I have become good friends just because we sit next to one another and maybe have the same sarcastic sense of humor, and find some things to entertain ourselves with. So it's not unlike, as I said, finding 10 people in an office setting who spend a lot of time together. And, some guys you're going to like, some guys you're going to like more than others. Some guys you're going to have some things in common with, some guys you're not. And it just kind of goes from there.
Hey, listen, whenever the fans are allowed back in the seats, during the next session of interleague play, if the Red Sox play the Braves in Atlanta, me and Dan will come down. We'll take you out to Magic City, get some wings, whatever you want.
Do you guys have Atlanta roots?
No, not at all.
No. Toby's just looking for an excuse to get down there.
Okay.
But no.
Have you? How much have you guys? Have you traveled much in terms of going to other ballparks?
Not really. No, I've been to Fenway, obviously. Yeah. Tampa, back when it was like bad Tampa, like $650 at the door Tampa, and I had a business trip in Cincinnati last year, and at the last second we decided to do a booze cruise instead of going to the Reds game. So no, very limited on my end.
That's not a great ballpark.
Oh, really? But no, very, very limited on my end. No.
Yeah.
So have you? I don't think I've ever talked about it before.
No, I've tried to get to a lot of NBA arenas, but I haven't been to that I can remember. I don't think I've been to a park outside of Fenway.
Yeah. I sat down, somebody asked me once, and I sat down and listed the number of ballparks that I've been to. And I happen to be kind of in that sweet spot where the big the new ballpark boom that came about with Camden Yards in the early 90s. So in a lot of places, I've been to 2 ballparks.
Yeah.
And in some, I've been to 3, Atlanta being one of them. Fulton County Stadium to begin with, and then the one they built for the Olympics in '96, and now Truist out in the suburbs. So I've done 3 in Atlanta, and presumably when we get back to traveling, Arlington, Texas will also be 3.
Oh yeah.
And that's within a relatively small period. When you think about the age of some ballparks, now it's, to have one city go through 3 ballparks in 32 years. And meanwhile, Fenway is, creaking away at 110 or whatever it is now.
Crazy.
But, people are blown up. Like, wait a minute, didn't the Braves just build the new place? Well, not just, but it was in the 90s, and now that's outdated, and the one in Texas is outdated. So, yeah, I think I did it. I listed them once, and I came up with 50 something.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of that, as I said, is timing, because so many cities have built them in the last 30 years, and some are on ballpark number 3 in my tenure.
Real quick, what is traveling and being in Denver like? I assume you've been to the Rocky Stadium, especially at the World Series. Is that as noticeable?
The World Series there, I think I've probably done 3 or 4 interleague visits by the Red Sox. It's an interesting part of town. It's downtown, and they've really built up the area around Coors. So there's a lot of breweries, a lot of bars. You walk from a hotel in the true center of downtown Denver, and you walk through this district that is just, breweries and bars and brew pubs and gastro pubs and all kinds of places. So they've done a nice job building up this kind of mini economy right around the ballpark. And then, the weird thing is that, especially early and late in that season, you could get, 6 inches of snow one day, and it's, and it's 70 the next. So that's just the nature of Denver weather. But yeah, Denver's a cool city.
Yeah, I meant more like everyone talks about the altitude and how balls just fly out. Is it that like tangibly noticeable, like traveling from Boston out there? And
some people say that they can, they can get a little. I mean, first of all, when you're, in Denver, I don't think you notice it quite as much. You start going up into the mountains in the nearby area.
True.
People talk about, you get shortness of breath pretty easily. I don't notice much just walking around Denver. But look, the evidence suggests that the ball just does fly, and that's why they have the humidor and everything else. But
I think so. We talked about, someone did like a extrapolation or something with like Barry Bonds numbers. We played every game at Coors Field, and it was like 1,600 home runs or something.
Yeah, I was going to say,
or something absurd.
If he hit 70 something playing in San Francisco, which was not a great ballpark for home runs, I mean, it's probably not a stretch to say he might have hit triple figures if he had played at Coors Field at home, which is, it's like cartoonish to say, but
not that there were any other factors he was taking.
Right. Depends on whether he could still get his supply in Denver.
Certainly.
The ball still would have reached McCubby Cove, I'm convinced.
From Denver.
One way or the other, no matter where it was hit from.
So I know we're coming up on time. Before we let you go, Sean, do you have a minute or two for some quick fire, kind of rapid question type of things? Let's get out of here. So first one, favorite baseball movie?
Probably Bull Durham.
Good choice.
Even though it chronicles minor league baseball, which I really haven't covered all that much of when I was younger and working for the Providence Journal, I would cover some home games at McCoy, certainly did my share of those, but I never traveled with a minor league team. But I just think it's not overly pious in its approach to the game. There's an appreciation for the game, but it's also it isn't afraid to be irreverent and poke some holes at baseball, and yet still get that feel of the love of the game. And it's an entertaining movie. So just off the top of my head, I'd say probably Bull Durham.
Good one.
Major League is funny too.
I was just going to say that.
Very different. And then
very accurate, I assume.
Yeah, and and then there's something like The Natural, which is 8 Men Out was great for chronicling a particular era or season. So there's been a lot of great ones, but off the top of my head, I'd probably say Bull Durham.
That's a good one. Favorite Red Sox player post 2000? So like the last 20 years.
Pedro.
Good choice.
Yeah, I just well, I know he's supposed to be rapid fire. I won't go into
no, that's fine. No, that's
just a brilliant baseball mind, a smart guy. At his peak, right in that era, in the late 90s and early 2000s, that 5-year run is as good as anybody. Matched it up with Koufax in the 60s.
Yep.
And endlessly entertaining, comfortable in his own skin, smart. The one thing I always appreciated about Pedro is his command of the English language. He worked so hard at that. Riding buses in the Midwest League of the Dodgers as a 17-year-old and forcing himself to learn the language. And he understood the use of idioms and catchphrases and colloquialisms. Just a bright guy who, in my mind, would be successful doing whatever he did. It just happened to be he chose throwing a baseball, which, of course, he was fine at.
Pretty good at, Is he still on TV? Is he on MLB Network?
Yeah, he's still doing some TBS stuff. I think you'll see him more now in the next couple of weeks.
No, we had an episode before where we talked about just, dominant athletes across whatever. And he's one of the first guys I said. So you said specifically his peak. In my mind, that was the epitome of just a dominant baseball player. Like when he took the mound, whether it was against Tampa, Baltimore, the Yankees, and the ALCS, it didn't matter.
Right.
It was, okay, we can get 9 innings. We can get at least 10 Ks. We have a chance to win this game.
Yeah.
And then he would just take it to the next level. Like the All-Star game, obviously, the series in Cleveland, just like the epitome of like a game face, like type of player. So
intensely competitive.
Intense is the best way to put it.
And I mean, he had everything about him. He just he had a little mean streak in him when he had to.
Don't run at him.
Yeah,
especially
right.
For an older guy in a Yankees jacket,
or Ice Williams or anybody else that tried over the years. So Pedro will. I can't imagine anyone supplanting Pedro in my book.
Yeah, good call. Fenway food, best thing to grab at Fenway during a game.
Well, I don't often grab food.
It's true. You're working.
We have there's a media dining room which leaves a lot to be desired. It was maybe 10 years ago. It was probably one of the best in Major League Baseball. It has sadly fallen off. But I think I have to kind of go with the old standby of the sausage and peppers outside are pretty good.
So question, I just thought of this. So you're obviously a beat writer covering the games. Are you ever able to, quote unquote, take a night off and just go to the game as a fan? Or is that?
But when my kids were younger, it's kind of like, if that's your job, do you want to go back to your office for your off
That's
night?
Fair.
When my kids were younger and wanted to go to games, I would enjoy that to just, not because that's where I wanted to be, but I enjoyed watching the game through their eyes and seeing, it was a good experience to me because I got to, we can get jaded in this business. You see game after game, season after season, they all run together. And then, you've got a 12 and 9-year-old that you take and they're just wide-eyed like you were the first time you win.
Sure.
So it's been a long time. My kids are grown now. One of them's married. So I haven't taken them in a long time, but I used to enjoy doing that every once in a while.
Yeah, that's probably good. Last one. Speaking of fandom, what's your favorite team outside of baseball in the other major sports?
I'm probably a Bruins fan.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong New Englander, and I came of age in the late 60s. The Impossible Dream Team in Yaz in 67 was my introduction to baseball. And Bobby Orr and the Big Bad Bruins in the late 60s were my gateway drug to hockey. And hockey remains my sort of sport of fandom. You stop being a fan when you do this for a living. It's not journalistically sound to be certainly rooting for the team that you're covering, and it's your business. So you're not caught up in rooting for outcomes other than ones that might get you home, 3 days earlier if a series ends, and you want so-and-so team to win because they're already up 2-0 or whatever. But hockey is because it kind of dovetails in opposition to my work year. I come home in October, and that's when the NHL is getting going, and then they're going to their playoffs when the regular baseball season is starting. So I probably watch more hockey than any other sport other than baseball, and I'd say the Bruins.
Yeah, good call. So where are you from originally? You said you
grew up in Chelmsford.
Oh, that's like where most of my family's
not far from me.
Yeah.
Where do you live, Soapy?
I'm in Nashua.
So okay. New Hampshire, it's right on the border. Yeah.
Yep. I lived in Kingsborough for a while.
Oh, yep. That's where my dad's from.
And grew up in Chelmsford. Spent a lot of time in Rhode Island. Went to Providence College. That's what got me to Rhode Island. Then I worked for the Providence Journal for a long time, and moved back to Massachusetts about 25 years ago.
Nice.
And but I'm from Littleton and actually live pretty close to that. I'm from Chelmsford, and I now live in Littleton, which is 2 towns away from me.
Oh, cool. Okay. Small world. Next time we'll do it in person, if that's a real thing to do. But no, we'll let you go. Before we let you go, Sean, where's the best place for people to find you online to keep following you?
Yep. Well, Twitter is Sean_McAdam. And the regular day job is bostonsportsjournal.com, which for people who don't know is a subscriber-based website that focuses exclusively on Boston pro teams, Red Sox, Patriots, Bruins, Celtics. We've got, great people handling the beat. It's Greg Bedard's website. People may know him from
Big boy.
His earlier time, right? At the Boston Globe and Sports Illustrated, and Greg was like me, fell victim to the media reorganization and decided to get this going about 3.5 years ago. And people can check it out at bostonsportsjournal.com. Subscriptions less than $40 a year, and if we do say so ourselves, the content is real good. If you're a fan of one or more of the Boston teams, we keep them covered pretty well for you, and ask that you check it out.
Awesome. We'll make sure that we do. Sean McAdam, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime soon. Appreciate it.
Happy to do that. Thanks for having me, guys. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Sean.